We are looking to get more information basically about exactly what is going to happen today at that meeting, that summit, that one-on-one with President Donald Trump and also President Putin. So let's get much more information since we can't get to Willie at this point. We're going to bring in CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd. Sam, thank you for joining us. Hopefully you can hear and see me at this point. What are you watching for when it comes to this meeting?
Well, I do think it's interesting who's actually on the ground in Alaska, from the Russian side at least. President Trump has said that this meeting is about listening to President Putin and trying to figure out how to end the war. But the Russian delegation does not just include defense officials. Instead, the Russian delegation includes their lead official for investment and their minister of finance. That could be because President Trump is going to discuss either putting on additional economic sanctions or lifting those that are currently in place, or because Russian President Vladimir Putin really wants to try to use this meeting to convince President Trump that enhancing bilateral investment and bilateral trade is good for both countries. So I'll be watching to see whether investment and trade are something that the two leaders discussed during the press conference or even in the spray prior to their bilateral.
Yeah. Okay, Sam. So we now know some of the people who will be in Alaska today during that meeting. We know Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, will both attend. Who are some of the other officials headed to Alaska, and what role will they play when it comes to these discussions today?
Well, as I mentioned, we know on the Russian side that they're bringing their Minister of Defense, they're bringing their Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, who's a very, very seasoned diplomat. And they're bringing their Minister of Finance and their lead official for investment. So, from the Russian side, they are certainly expecting to try to discuss trade and investment opportunities in addition to the defense and foreign affairs related portfolios, which is unsurprising because we should expect President Vladimir Putin of Russia to try to use investment and trade opportunities to try to sway President Trump and try to play into President Trump's desire to come away with some sort of economic win in addition to a foreign policy win.
Okay, we shall see what happens today. CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.
All right, so we want to go back to CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman. As we said, he is on the ground live in Anchorage, Alaska. And hopefully, Willie, you can hear me and you can see me at this point. Thank you again for joining us on 24/7 today. So here's a top line from President Trump this morning. High stakes. So what exactly is on the line today, Willie?
Hey there, Mugo. Good to be with you this morning from Anchorage, Alaska. Well, lives are at stake here. That is essentially what the president is saying. He's hoping to stop the killing. Remember, a ceasefire is certainly something that the Europeans want, the Ukrainians want. In fact, that is something that was mentioned in that virtual call with President Trump ahead of this summit. And the president talked about that aboard Air Force One on his way here to Anchorage, Alaska. Listen.
You had said earlier this week that Putin would face severe consequences if you get the sense from him that he's not interested. What do you mean by that?
Economically severe. Yes, it will be very severe. I'm not doing this for my health, okay? I don't need it. I'd like to focus on our country, but I'm doing this to save a lot of lives. Yeah, very severe.
And now, as you described, the president talked about the chances of this meeting success or a failure. And if indeed it does not come to an agreement or a type of ceasefire or any type of meaningful progress, the president, as he has said, is willing to put more sanctions on Russia. Remember, those secondary sanctions are a tool that the president has already used against India, ramping up the tariffs on Indian goods that are imported here to the United States. In large part, the president says because India continues to purchase Russian oil. So we'll have to wait and see in terms of what economic pain the president puts on Russia if they don't move towards the peace process. But as Sam perfectly mentioned, there's the economic conversation on the table here, better ties between Russia and America as a potential branch that that both presidents could use to bring President Putin to the peace process and stop the fighting in Ukraine.
Willie, there are some out there who are saying that this summit is already a win for President Putin. Why is that?
Yeah, well, look, President Putin has really been isolated on the world stage, and now he has an opportunity to not only leave his country, which he doesn't do very often because of that warrant out for his arrest, accusing him of war crimes, but he is now meeting with President Trump on American soil. This is the first time the two men have met since 2019, the first trip that President Putin has made to the United States in in 10 years. So this is a significant meeting. The two men will have plenty of time to be before the cameras. They'll meet each other, of course. Once Putin arrives here, they'll have that press conference, be able to take questions. But this is, and some would say, is a win for Putin because he has this sit-down meeting. He gets to essentially stall those tougher sanctions that President Trump promised. That deadline came and went. He, of course, will have the chance to sit down with Trump and improve his relationship. That relationship has really soured over the past several months, with President Trump growing increasingly frustrated with Putin, with him not moving towards the peace process. So President Putin certainly has a conversation to have with, a serious conversation to have with President Trump. But both men really have, their relationship has been hot and cold over the years, and today will be a significant test of that relationship. Can President Trump bring Putin to a ceasefire? We'll have to wait and see in terms of what happens there on the ground here in Anchorage.
Yeah, a significant test indeed. CBS News White House reporter Willie James Edmond following all of it from Anchorage, Alaska for us today. Thank you so much for your time. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, relatives of prisoners of war being held in Russia came together for a rally ahead of today's summit. They gathered outside the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv, calling on President Trump to not make any deals without Ukraine. They say any land swap agreements must include the return of thousands of Ukrainian prisoners. Polls taken in Ukraine show most overwhelmingly want this summit to end the war, but they also oppose any truce that would come with crushing concessions. CBS News foreign correspondent Remy Inocencio is in London with a look at what the outcome could mean for both Ukraine and Russia.
Yes, if Putin agreed to a ceasefire, that might be the best case scenario for Ukraine, but that would also depend on what he actually asks for, what he actually demands for in return. Two of the five ministers joining Putin deal in the country's finances and in its direct investment, and that implies that there will be economic considerations, perhaps the lifting of crippling oil sanctions. Perhaps Putin might offer to invest in American companies or buy American goods to potentially sweeten any kind of deal with Trump. As for a worst-case scenario, that the two agree to push Ukraine to formally give up all of its land that Moscow controls, which is about 20% of the country, and give up all hopes of joining NATO. But these are red lines, even today, that Ukrainian politicians and its people say that they cannot and that must not be crossed. Many point to the fact that their families and their friends have, in fact, spilled their blood and died on that soil, trying to defend or take back territory. And in the 3.5 years since Russia's invasion, Russia's military has killed or wounded an estimated 400,000 Ukrainians. That's an estimate from the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. On the flip side, Ukraine's military has killed or wounded nearly 1 million Russians. And even this week, Russia's military has not stopped trying to advance. Its soldiers were even seen waving Russian flags on newly claimed Ukrainian soil. At the same time, Ukraine's military, and especially its drones, still tried and succeeded in hitting towns along Russia's border. But it is against a neighbor that we know dwarfs it in size and military power, and Ukrainians are very much weary. And again, through these past 3.5 years, Ukrainian support for a ceasefire has now risen to a majority, from about 20% to nearly 70%. And we count down to these final hours to that Trump-Putin summit in Alaska. Zelensky and his European allies have been in quiet mode. One possible win for Ukraine is if there is another meeting after this, that Zelensky will actually be at that table. Back to you.
Thank you, Ramy. And we'll have continuing coverage for you from Alaska all day, including the joint news conference Presidents Trump and Putin are planning to hold. John Dickerson will anchor the evening news from Anchorage, along with Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan. And you can watch that right here on CBS News 24/7.